Hi folks, welcome to another Richard Lehman review. We're at book 24 on this list now. Blimey, going through them quite quickly. And the book I wanted to speak about, number 24, is Alarums, weirdly pronounced. I think it's from a Shakespeare play. Um, uh, Never mind, carry on. It was released in 1990. I had a different school of thought there entirely. Released in 1992, but actually written again at some point in the mid 80s. This is another one of those books that Lehman wrote that it was either rejected or sort of put on the back burner, and then at some point found its way released in the early 90s when Lehman was really now in absolute control of his destiny, on a real run. But yeah, it's an earlier book released later. And this is one of two books that Lehman released that are not really horror novels, but they're crime books effectively. And this one is the weaker of the two, which is why it's here. But it's still an entertaining read. It concerns. I don't want to give too much away about this one because it's a bit of a mystery. But you've basically got this girl who receives visions, and she receives visions of her dad suffering a terrible accident. So, along with her boyfriend, she races off to collect her estranged sister so they can find out what's happened to their dad. Her sister and her don't really get along anymore, owing to a backstory where she blames her sister for always stealing her boyfriends because her sister is more beautiful and more alluring and something. There are quite a few suspects as to who's tried to cause an accident and kill off this dad because he's rich. You find that the mom is a stepmom, and she's not a particularly pleasant person. She's got very strong connections romantically to another guy who this beautiful sister used to be in a relationship with herself, and she is very worried because he, by all accounts, is a very unpleasant person. And along the way, the girl who's receiving visions is getting a little bit more unhinged about not only trying to piece together who's tried to kill off her dad, but the clearly growing affection between her boyfriend and her sister. And it's all building to something. To say any more about that would give away the story, which I don't really want to. It is an interesting story. Like I say, it's not Lehman's best, but Lehman very early in his career did want to try his hand at crime. He's done a lot of young adult fiction, a couple of westerns. He's done quite a few crime books for young adults, but he actually was interested in turning his attention to crime because, as he said himself in his On Layman's Terms writing novel, the stuff that he wrote was as much crime as it was horror. Lehman doesn't really have too many books with the supernatural or with monsters or creatures. It's almost always people doing awful things to other people. There are supernatural elements in some of his very, very best books, but 90% of his work is human beings doing things to human beings. And so he kind of wanted to turn his attention to the crime scene because crime books simply sell a lot better than horror books and they're more accepted. But for whatever reason, he got lumped as a horror writer, probably due to these very early novels being particularly horror focused. And he just embraced and accepted it. But this one it's an entertaining read, it really is. It's one of those books that I never really see anybody else talking about. Nobody ever really references this or discusses it. It didn't sell particularly well. Nobody really has this as their best book. In fact, there's a lot of Lehman fans that have never even heard of this book. And it's an odd one because it's kind of just one of those books that just goes completely ignored. But it really is a decent read. What I don't like about it is the fact that the ending is very contrived. What's going on with this girl and her visions and her behaviour? It's not explained as to why any of this is happening, which is a real shame. And it tries to do a real sort of twist ending about what's really caused all this, but it kind of falls flat for me. It doesn't really make much sense, and it's not a particularly great resolution. There's only a couple of characters in this story, and there's a lot less of the sex and violence that Lehman's known for. It's quite a tame book by his standards. One thing I do really like is that this beautiful sister, and is her name Penelope? I've read that many books in short succession that it all just blurs together. She's receiving all these obscene phone calls about this guy who knows who she is and where she lives and what he's going to do to her, and she's living in genuine fear of this guy. And the reveal as to who they are and what they're after, I actually thought was really, really clever. It's a genuinely great bit of writing by Layman, and yeah, genuinely really well done. Not to mention, without spoiling anything, but it's actually quite funny as well, in a kind of twisty, sick way. But yeah, I quite like that. But that's Alarums. I can't really say much about it without spoiling it, other than it's a crime book and it's a decent one. It really is. So that's why it finds itself here. So there's Alarums by Richard Layman, released in 1992, written back, I think it was 1985 this was written, and worth a look, worth a look.